Greetings and welcome to this analysis on Italy's political institutions that takes the move from Italy's reputation abroad as a messy political system, the transformations that have taken place in Italy's political scenario over the last 30 years, the recent changes to the Italian constitution that have reduced the parliament's membership of over 1/3, and also the fact that it seems that analysis on the Italian political system, structure and balance of powers in English are nearly absent. So in this video I try to do just that, also building on other video analyses that I've recently released in Italian though, and offer a few thoughts over the following three topics. So first, Italy's political institutional architecture. Second, the quantity of the members of parliament in Italy, which I will from now on shorten in MPs. And third, their quality in terms of the prerequisite necessary to become MP in Italy. Italy's constitution entered in force in 1948, which is to say, after a well-known and quite tortured period of Italian history, in particular, of course, the demise of fascism in 1943, and in 1946 the kicking out of the king and the establishment of the Republic. The Italian constitution, today a 72 years old, beautifully aged lady, notwithstanding some tasteless nip and tuck performed by some very poor plastic surgeon, is the product of the work carried out in 1946 and 1947 by the political parties that were elected in the very first universal suffrage for men and women aged 21 and over as Constitutional Assembly, and includes all ideas from liberal to Republicans, from fascist, nostalgic to monarchists. The Assembly was dominated, however, by three major forces: the Christian Democrats, the Socialists, and the Communists, which combined gathered 75% of the members. I think that it is not really surprising that the Constitution reacts to fascism by designing a state architecture that is the most distant from that of an authoritarian and executive-centered regime, and chooses in fact that of a parliamentary republic, where the core of power lays in the legislative, which is to say the parliament, made of two elected chambers with equal powers, each of which has to approve any laws. The executive, which is to say the government, is instead designed to be weak. In fact, without even needing an express vote of no confidence, whenever a measure backed by the government does not pass in parliament, there is a case for the opposition to put in question its legitimacy and call for a new one. Of course, this new government is supposed to be formed through a political majority of members already sitting in parliament, without new elections. And this, in fact, has been the case. While Italy may have become known for its political instability, whatever that means these days, honestly, this is so only if you look at the executive. In fact, in 72 years of republic, there have been 18 elections, hence 18 parliaments, which is one every 4 years, which is quite normal. The case appears indeed different if you look at the number of executives, which currently stand at 66, and these makes their average length to a little more than 1 year each, and no, this indeed is an uncommon feature. Still, in a parliamentary republic in general, or in the Italian parliamentary republic anyway, stability lays with parliament, not with government. Now, if you have a very central parliament in a relatively large and populous nation, it may not surprise then for MPs not to be an overly exclusive club. In fact, certain relatively minor changes aside, until September 2020, the Italian parliament accounted for a bit less than 1,000 members overall. And next to the two elected chambers, Italy's constitution envisaged also a third chamber, the National Council of Economy and Labor, which was supposed to bring in the input of businesses and experts from all fields. But it has instead never been properly used, and this is a true pity, but it's also a story for another time. This institutional design allowed, among many other factors, for the so-called Italian economic miracle of the 50s and the 60s, and for Italy to reach its economic peak around 1992 as the fourth largest economy in the world, after the US, Japan and Germany, briefly above France and well above the UK. Since then, however, and for a number of reasons, the growth of the country has stalled, which makes today for a 30-year-long stagnation in an overall context where historical divisions, also in terms of development of the country, have tended to widen their gap, with, to simplify, a north richer than Germany and a south possibly poorer than Greece. And while even today, Italy's manufacturing is the second largest in the European Union, below Germany, to which it is quite deeply integrated, but above France, it is perhaps understandable that the progressive jamming of the country created the political opportunity to push for the decentralization and local autonomy, mostly coming from Venice and Milan's areas, home to about 50 million Italians. Pretty much the same as what was going on about at the same time in the UK with its devolution project, even though moving from a different starting point in terms of history and institutional structure, but also with an eye to apparent success stories such as that of federal Germany. The process, however, was flawed in principle for at least two reasons. First, it did not take into account that Italy has a significantly more articulated geography, geomorphology, and I dare say history compared to basically any other large country in Europe. And second, Italy, as a founding and key member of the European Union, was already in the midst of devolving power to it. Why am I saying this? Because in 2001, a reform of the constitution ultimately was approved, and by devolving certain powers and competences to the 20 subnational entities of Italy, the so-called regioni, it brought to a membership surge in local councils, which now account for some 900 local council members, each paid basically as a national MP, despite disposing only of a fraction of an MP power and responsibility. I have repeatedly criticized this reform in several respects in other videos. You're welcome to check them out if the topic is of interest to you. This is just to give a quick overview of Italy's chief political institutions. Let's now turn to the quantity of Italian MPs. As I illustrated a bit earlier, Italy is a parliamentary regime, which makes it a democratic system where the executive is weak by definition. This makes it different from executive-centered systems such as France or Poland, but also, simplifying a bit, the US or the UK. The case of the UK is peculiar, as that is technically a parliamentary regime as well, a so-called parliamentary monarchy, but their long-established customs have determined the concentration of considerable power in the hands of the executive, and we've seen this with the quite intense power struggle throughout the Brexit drama, which has so far involved 4 British governments and 2 parliaments. Point being that it should not really surprise that parliamentary regimes, be they the UK, Italy or others, have lots of members in their parliaments. And indeed, this was the case with Italy until September. 3 points here. First, the original text of the Constitution, that of 1948, established a proportion between the number of MPs and the country's population. 1 member of the lower chamber, the so-called Camera dei Deputati, or Chamber of Deputies, every 80,000 citizens, and 1 member of the upper chamber, the so-called Senato della Repubblica, every 200,000. If this regional design were to still be in place, we'd have today about 1,050 MPs in total, 700 in the Camera and 300 in the Senato. Second, in 1963, the political class concerned with the growth of Italy's population, and it's almost funny to think about that now with Italy's disastrous demographic regression, anyway, concerned that the constitution did not place a ceiling on the number of MPs, decided to fix the numbers. I mean, literally. 630 for the Camera and 315 for the Senato, hence a total of 1945. There is also a small group of 7-8 non-elected senators, but that's not the point now. Third and last point is the constitutional amendment to curtail the number of MPs that was just confirmed by popular referendum this September of 2020. Here, the anti-politics sentiment has prevailed by far in the popular vote, and now the number of MPs in Rome has been cut to 600 in total, 400 in the lower house and 200 in the upper house. Of course, nobody even talked about the regiment of 900 quasi-MPs created in the meantime in local assemblies of Italy's subnational entities, the regioni, whose cost by far exceeds the savings made through the cut at the National Assembly. This sums up the point on quantity of Italy's MPs. Let's now turn to their quality. I have recently taken issue with the quality of Italian MPs in a dedicated video analysis in Italian. Here's the 3 key elements. First, it may be considered that in parliamentary regimes, where MPs are a big lot, on average the attention to their actual quality is somehow less stringent than in other democratic systems where representation is more limited. This has become even more so in Italy as a reaction to the memory of the ban on political ideas and parties and certain serious persecution of dissent that happened during fascism, and the development of a heightened sensitivity against limitations or restrictions over personal and civil liberties. All beliefs that have become deeply rooted in the common perception of the people, which in the popular discourse are now considered by default trumping any idea of preparation or verification of credentials for any elected office. Side note, these adamant convictions are somewhat funny, as in any other respect, Italians have still not seriously dealt with fascism, in a country that overall associated to it without significant dissent for almost 20 years, but where everyone today claims to be a descendant of a persecuted partisan, which, to be clear, is plainly not true. But again, that's another story for another day. So the disassociation between the idea of requiring or checking credentials and the concept of democracy has produced puzzling outcomes, such as the non-execution of all provisions in the Constitution where it envisages, for instance, the registration of unions and political parties to check that their internal regulations reflect the democratic values of the Constitution itself. So, trapped, very conveniently, in this artificial deadlock of not wanting to impose limitation to the freedom of workers to form unions or for citizens to form political parties, the parliament never created such records. And unfortunately, the same goes for any instruments to support or improve the quality of MPs. Secondly, when it comes to politics, the Italian constitution expressly favors workers over non-workers, such as needs, and requires the effective participation of elected citizens to the life of the political institution that they have become part of. The most important being Parliament, of course. The constitution expressly tasks Parliament with determining the requirements to run for MP office. The Parliament, however, never even attempted to fulfill this task by conveniently adopting a formalistic approach over the principle of equality. If certain requirements are imposed, like for instance a minimum education or some work experience, then some citizens would run the risk to be automatically excluded. This formalistic approach violates, however, the substance and the nature of the principle of equality by transforming ignorance from the freedom that it is into some sort of right, and not opposing the concerning belief that ignorance is something to be proud of in a country that scores already very poorly in all education indexes, and it is the worst performing by far in the G7. I mean, does anyone really want a neat and rather of a state? By making access to parliament an unconditional and unrestrained right of anyone, the state abdicates to its primary function, which is to say that of creating and maintaining the conditions to protect and improve the democratic system itself, which you get by granting to people proper tools to be able to effectively participate in the democratic system. Any work presumes experience in the sense of education and preparation, including that of MP. Of course, there is lots of political interests in choosing not to cultivate the people. Here's 3 examples that come right out of mind. First, you don't need to spend on education, which is indeed a costly and long-term endeavor. Second, if you keep people ignorant, it is easier for old politicians to cultivate both clienteles outside of parliament and yes-men inside of it. And third, it is easier to keep out of politics the independent, educated, and experienced people because instead of getting frustrated by trying to get access to a perverted system, they are more likely to dedicate themselves to other endeavors, possibly less frustrating and better paid. And indeed, Italy is the only G7 nation with a significant net migration from the country. Italy exports qualified people while all others import them. It is hardly surprising then that the Italian laws on access in politics make it basically impossible for people that may have goodwill and skills but no solid political connections or huge capital to enter the game. Politicians know how to keep the party exclusive, literally. And in this respect, this is the most critical difference, for instance, between Italy and Germany, where, simplifying a bit, anyone can run for election without significant entry barriers. The outcome of this situation are obvious and appalling nonetheless, but I'm not referring to the folkloristic yet very wrong election of a Hungarian porn star in the Italian parliament in 1987, but to Italy's current Minister of Foreign Affairs that barely holds a high school diploma and speaks no foreign language, or the Vice Minister of the Economy, proud of her bachelor in management. A situation simply unheard of in comparison with any other G7 country or 2 trillion economy. Ever. Third and last, which are the possible solutions in this quite sad framework that do not step on any allegedly ideological toes but in any way try to enhance the average preparation of elected MPs for the job they are called to perform. Answering this question is even more important now that access to parliament has become more difficult given that the number of MPs just shrunk. The simplest but potentially very effective solution consists in giving some proper meaning to the term requirements that the Constitution requests Parliament to identify, and that Parliament instead never did. At this stage, it is no longer feasible to require people that want to run for elected office to offer credentials of their education or work experience because of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, and because these requirements would be conveniently interpreted as barriers to entry into politics against the less fortunate. As if the job of the state is that of protecting ignorance as opposed to promoting culture, education, and experience, especially before assuming pivotal roles of responsibility in society. Anyhow, let's just leave it for the moment that anyone can continue to run independently of their credentials. And know that today, the only practical requirement is that you need to convince some party members to put you in an electoral list, with all that this implies. Anyway, if the MP hopeful manages to do that, and then garner enough popular votes to be elected, such an election is valid, but subject to taking some courses and passing the relevant tests over a selection of subject matters that a member of parliament in a parliamentary republic is supposed to have at least a basic knowledge of. See it as a job training with some final tests over basic aspects of the job so that MPs have the basic instruments to deliver. I'm talking about fundamental subjects such as Italian constitution, macroeconomics, European Union, Italy's international and EU relations, and the lawmaking process in Italy. These courses and tests are best organized by the Chamber's administrations based on top Italian university courses, and yes, if the nominally elected MP cannot pass the tests after the training, then his or her election will not be perfected and he or she will not become an MP proper. But wait, before you start shouting against the triumph of democracy over democracy, note that no harm to the democratic system or the popular vote will be done, as the first non-elected candidate of that same party will be then called in with the same procedure. This way, the democratic system puts in place some antibodies to preserve and possibly improve itself, all the while offering the basic instruments to elected MPs to get a grasp of their new job before they do that. And yes, as the Italian constitution repeatedly refers to effective participation to the political life of the country, if the elected MP is unable to pass basic tests on basic subject matters at the core of his or her job, it must be assumed, as we all do with respect to any job, that he or she is unfit, certainly so to effectively participate in the most important job there is in a parliamentary system, which is that of Member of Parliament. This sums up the key points that I wish to make with regard to Italy's parliamentary regime and the quality and quantity of its MPs. First, they're a good lot because Italy is a parliamentary republic and it has been arguably wrong to reduce their numbers recently. Second, MPs are currently not very well prepared to do their job because of a disastrous interpretation of very important principles and rules of the basis of a democracy, a reading detrimental for the Italian society at large, but which is supported by senior politicians that of course prefer to keep their solid and Byzantine grip over the system. Third and last, solutions are possible and possibly neither difficult nor costly. What lacks is the political will to adopt them. And good luck, Italy! I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you for watching. You're very welcome to subscribe to this channel if you'd like to be notified when the next content is released, and feel free to drop any suggestion as to the next topic that you'd like me to deal with in the contact form that you find on the channel page. Till the next time, be well.